announcement. Exam is next week, next Wednesday, as I had announced. A week from this Wednesday. The first lab is, I think, either done in terms of being graded or about to be done. The grades will be available on Moodle. I presume you know that we have been releasing grades of homeworks and things like that on Moodle. Okay, so you should keep an eye out for whenever you turn in an assignment. Soon after that, the grades will appear. We don't actually print anything and hand things back here. Okay, it is all being done electronically. So grades for the lab will be out. There will be a new lab that I will put out this week, but it will be due after the midterm, so you don't have to actually have two things due on the plate at the same time. But I'm going to give it out in advance now. Okay, sometime this week we'll discuss it and so on, and then have it be due and then maybe a week to 10 days after the midterm. Okay. So those were the second homework also will be done in terms of being graded and handed out this week. I don't think it is done yet. All right. So we'll have everything that was handed in, handed back to all of you. I did put in on Moodle a sample midterm and some solutions, so you can go take a look at that. If you want to know what kind of flavor of questions to expect, it is there. Okay. Any questions about the exam? It is closed book, closed notes. Okay, it will be an evening exam, not during class. There won't be class that day. Okay, because I do not have class and then have an exam. So we will not have class. It will just be in the evening in the adjoining room here. Okay. Yes.
How long will it be?
How long will it be? Usually it is 90 minutes long. But typically time is not a constraint. If you really, all of you feel like struggling because of time rather than knowing the material, we can give a little more time. Usually time has not been an issue. 90 minutes is about okay. I have not set the exam, but I think it's usually 90 minutes. Okay? The final exam is always take home. So, and the midterm is in class. That's the way we have done it. That's what we will do again. Okay? Alright. So, let's continue where we left off last time. We are going to start a new topic today on consistency and application. Before I actually talk about the new topic, there are a couple of slides from last time just to remind you it's been more than a week because of the break. We were talking about concurrency control. I talked specifically about ACID properties and distributed transactions and this notion of allowing multiple transactions to execute concurrently in the databases system, so you get parallelism. Okay, we talked about this notion of optimistic concurrency control, where you don't have any locks. You just let transactions run, and then at the end, before you commit, you check if there was any conflict. If so, you abort. If not, you let them finish. Okay, and you take an optimistic view that concurrent transactions typically don't access the same data, so they're independent and they can actually finish without locking. And then I talked about pessimistic concurrency control, where you do use locks, and we mentioned this notion of two-phase locks, where you have a growing phase for acquiring locks and a shrinking phase. And I remember that I said the reason we have all of that is for you to understand how to implement similar locking concepts in any distributed system. The database is just an example to use to understand how you should do this without encountering deadlock. Okay, towards the end I was mentioning this notion of timestamp based concurrency control. Okay, here we are going to use Lamport's clock. So we assume that each transaction has a timestamp. Okay, and essentially if you want to do some operation that conflicts with transaction Tj, you compare their timestamps. Okay, and you see which has a Lamport's clock timestamp that is lower than the other one. And then you basically take the earlier one and you abort it, because the later one may have modified some data that may invalidate the earlier one. So you will just let that go, and you must restart it with a timestamp. Okay? The way this works, the way you figure out if there is a conflict is for every record or every data item in the database, you will keep two timestamps. Okay? The time of the last read and the time of the last write. Okay? And these are logical time, not physical time. So the max RTS is the max timestamp for a transaction that read it, and the WTS is the timestamp of a transaction that wrote. Okay, these are respectively the last read, the most recent read, and the most recent write. So for every record, you have now two timers that tell you when was that record last read or last written. And the way you figure out if there's a conflict is before any transaction, a new transaction does a read, you look at the transaction's timestamp and you compare it with the timestamp of the last write. And then if a newer transaction has already written to it, then you will basically abort this timestamp, abort the transaction rather. Otherwise, you will let the read go ahead. Because that is trying to see if there is a read-write conflict. There's a newer transaction has begun and it's already writing to this data item. Older transaction shouldn't be shouldn't be allowed to use it. Okay. And the write for a write, and then of course you have to, if the read does succeed, you have to basically update the last time of the last read with the time of the transaction. Okay. And as far as writes go, you actually look at the transaction timestamp and you look at the read or the write timestamp. If there is a newer transaction than this one that has actually either started reading or writing to the data item, then this transaction yields, saying there's a newer transaction, it gets priority, you abort and you basically start afresh. Okay, so if either of these two is true, the time of last read or time of last write is newer than the time of the transaction, you will abort the transaction. Otherwise, you will perform the write and update the write timestamp. Okay. So essentially, we are using Lamport's clocks to determine whether there may be an issue. Okay. Remember that here we don't know if there is a conflict. We are just using the timestamp to see if there is a possibility of a conflict. Okay. If there are two transactions that are both accessing the same data item, you let the newer transaction go with it first, because an older transaction that uses any values written by the newer transaction may get inconsistent. So that's really the concept. You use this notion of timestamps and you compare. Okay, so that is timestamp based concurrency control. Those were the two slides we actually skipped over last time, so I just wanted to cover those quickly. Today we are going to, as I said, start a new topic, which is consistency and replication. Okay? So just to recap, we have covered maybe 3 or 4 lectures of material on this, what I was calling general or canonical problems in distributed system. Okay, those are problems that arise over and over again, and you have to use similar solutions, whether it is time stamping, using vector clocks, leader election, clock synchronization. We looked at a whole slew of techniques, distributed snapshots, termination detection. Okay, so those are all general principles, or not principles, general mechanisms that you can use when you design any distributed system or application. Okay, as I had mentioned also, the next lab will require you to use some of these ideas to essentially build on the previous lab. Okay, so that is an aside, but keep that in mind. Okay, so now what we are going to do is switch back to the next chapter, which is going to be on consistency and replication. Now we looked at more general principles. We'll look at how you can actually implement consistent replication. Okay, so let's start with this notion of replication. In the very first class, I had mentioned that if you have a distributed system, the multiple machines and your data, you can replicate the data on more than one machine. And I said that when we look at chapter 7, we'll come back to this, look at this in more detail. Okay, so let's first look at the concept. So whenever you have replication, you have two kinds. Okay, you can either replicate the data or you can replicate the computation. Okay, replicating the computation means the same application or process is running on multiple machines. Okay? Replicating the data means a copy of any data item is stored on multiple machines. Okay? So you can have one or the other or both. Okay? They are two independent dimensions, whether you have the application running or the data. Okay? Frequently you will have both if you have larger systems. Okay? When we come back to case studies and look at the web, we will see that you have actually, when you have large web servers, you replicate both the computation and the data. Your web servers running on multiple machines, they all serve the same content. So the content is replicated and the process is also replicated. Okay, so that's replicating both the computation and the data. Okay. But you may ask, why replicate? What does this give us? Okay, so this is again recap from what we had looked at. So replication is a common technique in distributed system. Typically it is done for one of two reasons. Okay, either reliability concerns or performance concerns. Okay, reliability concern simply says that if you have only one copy of your data in your system, and if something happens to that copy because of a failure, say, okay, then your system cannot function. If you only have a database, one copy, and the database goes down, your application becomes unfunctional. You cannot function anymore. Okay. So in this case, if you have multiple copies, okay, so you can basically keep your application running even though there may be downtimes or failures or data corruption or any of these things. Okay. So data replication, or for that matter in computation replication, is often done for reliability reasons, to ensure high availability of the data and or service. Okay, so if one replica goes down, there are others that you can use to continue to access. That's one. The other reason, common reason for replication is performance. Now, typically, if the workload that your application or database or whatever it is seeing exceeds the capacity of a single machine or a single disk, then you have no other way to scale than other than to replicate. Okay, let's say you have a single machine web server, okay, and given, let's say it has the machine has a fast disk and maybe some number of cores. Okay. Now with that capacity, you may be able to sustain a certain workload. Maybe you can sustain hundreds of requests every second. But if the workload coming to your application exceeds that limit, then that machine is going to get saturated. Okay, either the CPU will get maxed out or the disk will get maxed out, and you will have to start turning away requests. The only way to continue to scale is you create another copy, okay, create another replica. So you may have large numbers of replicas for very large systems. Okay, so those are performance. Okay, so you can scale with the size of the distributed system. You can also do what is called geo-replication. Okay, so the simplest form of replication is you have another machine or some numbers of machines, they are all in the same location. When you geo-replication, you basically put replicas in different geographic regions. Okay, and then what you do is when requests come in, you find the closest replica to service that request. This also gives better latencies. Okay, so if, for instance, you may have a replica in each continent if you have a global application. So if users from Europe are always sent to the European replica because that is closer and can provide better service. Okay. So that's also a performance concern. So that's called geo-replication. Okay, so you have to use replication for both of these reasons. Okay, reliability or performance or both. So now with that in mind, we have to look at replication in more detail. There are many issues that you have to decide if you are going to use replication. Okay, the first one is when do you use it, how many replicas to create, where to put them, and so on. Okay, so you may decide that replication is statically done or it could be done dynamically. Okay, when we do some cloud computing assignments shortly, you will see that cloud platforms allow you to replicate on the fly. You don't have to decide upfront. Okay, when the load goes up, you can react to it on the fly and create new replicas rather than saying or having to guess a priori how many requests am I going to see, how many replicas do I need. You can do this at runtime. So replication can be done statically or dynamically. You can figure out how many replicas to create. That depends on the workload. If you have an estimate of the workload, you can say how many machines do I need. Is it 1, 300? Okay, you can decide that. If you don't know the workload, you will have to actually do that also at runtime. Okay. And where to put the replicas? Are they all in the same location, different location? All of these are interesting questions. Okay, so now the thing I will say is we will not talk about any of these today. Okay, because talking about them in general often doesn't make any sense. The answers to this question depend on the application. Okay, there is no one answer. So what we will do is when we come back to the World Wide Web discussion, we will come back to all of these issues and see for the web and when you have web servers and web proxies, how do you make these decisions? What makes sense? Okay, so that's the best way to learn because that's a very concrete example. We know what web workloads look like, what web servers do. So all of those issues make sense in a particular context. Okay, so we won't actually look at this important question. These are at the heart of replication, but we are going to ignore them for now. Instead, we will talk about a slightly different issue that also arises when you have replication, specifically data replication, which is this notion of consistency. So in particular, we have to worry about how to maintain consistency whenever you have data replication. So the idea is very simple of what consistency means. If you have two copies of the same data item, if one copy gets updated because some application has updated it, the other copy also needs to be updated. How to do that is basically what their consistency mechanism will do. And there, as you will see, there's an entire spectrum of these consistency mechanisms. The idea is you want to keep all replicas in sync with one another. You don't want some replicas to have old versions of the data and some being new. So let's say it's a file. You have a file, let's say you're writing some source code or whatever for your project, and you have multiple copies of it. If you write to one and update it, but then the older version is on another machine and you go to it and it's older, then it doesn't make sense, it's inconsistent. You want somehow all of your writes to propagate to all of your replicas. So how to do that is what is this problem of consistency. So if one copy is modified, others become inconsistent. So whenever you have replication, you have to deal with consistency. What kind of consistency properties should I provide to the users or applications of the system? This is something you need to think about. And we'll see there's an entire spectrum starting from what is referred to as very strict forms of consistency to extremely loose forms of consistency, where the guarantee you give to users or applications becomes weaker and weaker. Okay? So what we are going to do today is take a general look at this notion of consistency. Rather, we will not say what applications need to use which forms. We'll just say we want to just understand what consistency mechanisms are out there and what do they do. Yeah. But before we jump into the mechanisms, there are two things I wanted to mention, which is who is responsible for ensuring consistency. Okay, so you can either do this at the application level or you can do this at the system level. You can either say it's not the system's responsibility to ensure consistency. The applications have to deal with that issue, and the applications can choose whatever makes sense for them. Okay, so you basically leave it to the application. Or you can say if the system supports replication, system will also support some form of consistency. Okay, whether the system is the operating system or the middleware is orthogonal, but the system designer has said if you replicate, let's say it's a file system, a distributed file system, if there's replication, you will implement some form of consistency. Whether if the application doesn't like it, it is stuck because it has to use whatever the system is providing. Okay, so there are pros and cons. In one case, there's more flexibility. Different applications can pick different types of mechanisms that provide different types of guarantees, okay, because it's the application's job. Right? But now the application designer has to implement a consistency mechanism. Right? So if you are doing a lab assignment and I said use replication for something, then you have to implement that in your application, because typically you will not find any consistency mechanisms in the kinds of systems you are dealing with, whether in Java or C or anything like that. Okay, so you will do it at the application level. But there are systems that will do that for you as well. Okay, but then you have to go with whatever the system designer has chosen as the best form of consistency for that system. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. But what the mechanism is orthogonal to who implements the mechanism. Yeah, so now let's go in and talk a little bit about replication and scaling and consistency. Okay? So there are many issues to keep in mind that will come into play when you decide what consistency mechanisms to use. Okay, so here is a slightly general argument. Okay, let's assume there is an object or a data item that is replicated n times. There are n copies of it, okay, in your system. Okay, and then we'll assume rather that these copies see a aggregate read frequency of R and a write frequency of W. Okay, what that means is, on an average, there are R reads of that data item. Let's say it's a file, just to make it very concrete. So let's say there's a file that's replicated n time. The file is seeing R reads, requests coming from application, and W writes. Okay? Now, as we will see, depending on the relative frequencies of R and W, we will have different kinds of consistency mechanisms will make sense. Okay, so let me just draw a picture here. Okay, let's say this is our file. Okay, and there are n copies of it. Okay? And there are R reads coming every second and W writes coming every second. Okay? Now for consistency, every time a write comes in, and let's say it updates any copy of the file, that write has to be propagated to all other copies so that you keep them in sync. Okay, that's what consistency mechanisms do. Now let's consider the case where the write frequency is much greater than the read frequency. Okay, that means there are a lot more writes to this file than there are reads. Okay, just as an example. Okay. So now every time there is a write, you are assuming that the consistency mechanism is going to send that write to all the other copies. Okay, send that update. Let's say you write and you append one line to your file. Okay, that write request has to be sent to all other copies, so all the copies are in sync. They have the same version of the data. So if there are n copies, there will be n minus 1 messages going out every time there is a write. Okay, that's called the overhead of your consistency mechanism. Okay, every write is triggering n minus 1 messages that go out to all of the other copies, so all the copies can be kept in sync. Okay. Now if the write frequency is very high, okay, every time there is a write, these messages are going to go out. Okay, so basically you will have these many messages, extra messages being generated every second, okay, or every per unit time, just to keep all the copies consistent. Okay, but reads are infrequent. Okay, so you may ask, is this price worth paying? If there are very infrequent reads, what does it matter if the write comes in that you have to go and update all of the copies? Okay? If there are reads, so if you get only one read an hour, but then if the file is getting updated literally every second, and then you're sending all these messages and you're keeping all the copies in sync, but nobody is reading those copies. Is that price worth paying? Okay. Why not pay that price only when you read? Right? So another way to have done the same consistency mechanism is when the read comes in, at that point you go and check what happened in the system since the previous read, bring all the copies in sync, and then you return the latest version of the file. Is that clear what I just said? Okay, so rather than having the system send out updates every often, you basically make the update, but the copies may be somewhat out of sync. Okay, maybe there's only one master and many slaves. So let all the writes come in and you only update the master copy as an example. Okay, and then when the read comes in, at that point you flush all of the updates that have come and make all the copies consistent. Okay. This will require you to, you're essentially not batching reads and sending them out only once in a while when the read comes. Okay. This will dramatically reduce the overhead of your consistency mechanism, and yet there is no impact on what the users are seeing because the read will still see the right version. It's not getting any inconsistent data. Is that clear what I just said? Okay. Now you can flip the argument and say, let's assume another scenario where the read frequency is much higher than the write frequency. Writes are infrequent, reads are frequent. Okay, let's take an example of a popular website or a web page of, so let's say CNN as an example. Okay. So, or any news site. Okay, they may get hundreds or thousands of requests to that page coming in every second. Okay. You don't see hundreds of thousands of updates to the CNN website every second. So maybe the website is updated every few minutes. Okay, because they may have a breaking news section where some news item just appears every few minutes. Okay. So the update frequency is once every few minutes. Read frequency is very high, hundreds of thousands of times a second. Okay. Completely opposite scenario. Okay. Now you can ask, if that is the case, if reads are a lot more frequent than writes, then what should you do? Every time there's an update, immediately propagate it to all the replicas. Okay, because there are so many reads, if you don't do that immediately, then some of the replicas will have stale data and they would have to return old versions of your web page in this case, which you don't want to do if you can avoid it. Okay. So in this case, it's well worth paying that price, and whenever a write comes in, go and update all the copies immediately. Pay this overhead of n-1 messages, keep all the copies in sync, because there are a lot more reads than writes, and the reads will actually benefit by seeing the most recent, the most fresh version of the page. Okay. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that what consistency mechanism you are going to choose, okay, will actually very much depend on lots of system factors. In this case, It means it's just the frequency of reads and writes, but there will be others as well. What is the application willing to tolerate? Are you okay getting a version of the web page that's 2 minutes old? Okay, or do you always want to get the most recent? Okay, if this is a bank database, you don't want any inaccuracies. You don't want if an account has been updated to give somebody an old version of the account balance because some other replica has not been updated. You want stricter forms of consistency. For web pages, it's okay. Right? If I update the course web page and put today's slides and you just see an old version, you will reload and you will go and look at it. Right? So it's fine to basically assume that there are some errors are, some not errors, but some inconsistencies are tolerable. It very much depends on the application scenario. Okay? And depending on what is required, you have to be willing to pay the price. Okay? The general rule is the stricter the consistency you want to provide, the higher is the overhead going to be. Okay? The strictest form will have very high overheads. But if that's what the application needs, then that's what you have to pay. Okay? In other cases, you may actually be able to get away by doing something that is less expensive. Okay? And this is primarily the reason we are going to have this entire lecture at all. Because you could have said, let the consistency always be strict. Let's assume that always all replicas are kept in sync. Okay? And then you just say, I am going to basically pay the price. But that is a very high price to pay, and most application designers in some cases are not willing to pay it. They want something weaker that is good enough for their application. So you have all weaker forms of consistencies that people have come up with that are implemented in various systems. Okay? So this is why we will look at this entire spectrum of consistency mechanisms, starting with strict, and by the time we are done with the lecture, we will have ended with some very loose forms of consistency that are still acceptable to many applications. Okay? Any questions here before I move on? Anything that I can clarify about this example to illustrate why you have to think hard about consistency mechanisms? Okay. So we'll start now with consistency models. This is the picture to keep in mind. Somewhat abstract picture. We'll assume only data replication here. So we'll assume that there are multiple disks on independent machines, each of which stores a copy of your data. Okay, so this is a distributed data store. Okay? Whether this is a file system, a distributed database, or just a set of websites, we don't care. Okay? From our abstract view, you just have multiple copies of the data sitting on disks. Okay, they are persistent. And we'll assume that there are multiple processes that are accessing this distributed store. Okay. Typically, a client or an application will be sent to the closest copy, but that doesn't have to be the case. It doesn't matter what copy you access. Basically, you want to ensure consistency mechanisms that will give you, as to the extent possible, the most recent version of any data item you are trying to access. And as we'll see, depending on how you define the most recent, we'll get different forms of consistency. Okay, so the consistency model, also referred to as consistency semantics, we think of it as a contract between the applications and the underlying data store, saying if you send in a read or the write request, what should I expect to see? Given that there are multiple copies floating around, what is the guarantee that the store is willing to provide, the data store? And that is what your consistency semantics will be. Right? Essentially, as I said, almost every semantics is trying to return the results of the most recent update to a file. And that is the most recent version. Right? But they will all differ in how last the most recent write is even defined. Okay? So you get different forms. So we'll start with the simplest one, which I already mentioned. This is referred to as strict consistency. Okay? So every read that any application sends, regardless of which disk, which replica, is always going to return the result of the most recent write. Okay? You will see what was the most recent write to the data item. Okay? And then what is the version of the data item that resulted from the write, that's what you will return. If you write to a file, next time a read comes in, no matter where that write happened, on which replica, next time a read comes in, that's the version of the file you are going to make visible. Strict consistency, very simple. Okay? Now this implicitly assumes a presence of a global clock. Okay? Because you can say, how do you know what? Define most recent. What does that mean? Okay? Because these are independent machines. From our abstract view, we know what most recent means. We'll say let's assume let's assume there's a perfect global clock. Most recent means that the write that has the latest time. Yeah, but as we know, there is, unless you actually assume a global clock, this is hard to even define. If you just use some clock synchronization, yeah, as I said, there is always some error in the clock synchronization. Two writes came more or less at the same time, but within the error tolerance of what NTP might provide. There with NTP has, let's say, 50 millisecond inaccuracies. If two writes came within 25 milliseconds of each other, how will you order them? You cannot, because you don't know. The clocks are actually can have higher error than what the writes show you. So how will you define this most recent write? It can only be done if you actually have a global clock. Yeah, so in some sense, it is actually hard to implement in practice. The other problem is it assumes that a write is immediately visible to all processes, okay, which is also a hard thing to achieve. Okay, results of a write, these messages that you send when a write comes in, are not going to instantaneously propagate to all the replicas. They will at least go at the speed of light. You cannot actually exceed the speed of light. Okay. So if these two replicas are actually cross country, they may take some number of milliseconds to propagate. Okay, that's how much the speed of light is going to sort of take to get there. Now, how will you ensure strict consistency? Okay, let's say that if there are two replicas, the speed of light distance between them is, let's say, delta t. Okay, that's how much they're separated by, and that's how much time it takes. Okay. So now a write comes in here at time t. Okay. And the read comes to the other replica at time t prime. If t prime is after t but is sort of smaller than delta t, you cannot guarantee strict consistency. Yeah, unless you delay that read. Only way to do it is you have to delay it. Because there is, even light cannot get there that fast. This read has actually occurred after this write. So if you want strict consistency, you want the version of the file that has resulted from that write to be made visible to this read at this other replica. Okay. So how will you do it? It's very hard to do. Okay. So there are some practical difficulties to deal with. Network delays are variable. You cannot assume global clock. Yet there are some simplifications we can make. Yeah, you can actually, you don't have to instantaneously reply to this read. You can wait and see if any writes occurred, and then you can figure out what was the version of the file, fetch it and go back and so on. So if you do all of that, then you can ensure strict consistency. But in practice, it's hard to achieve. And moreover, it's very expensive. And that's the bigger problem. There are all these issues that you have to deal with, but even if you are really willing to deal with them, it is quite expensive to deal with. Okay? So now we'll start weakening these semantics. Okay, the next one we'll talk about, this is called sequential consistency. Okay, so you have to understand what strict is, and then we'll see what sequence. So this is weaker than strict. Okay, so all that we are going to do here is assume that for a given application, reads and writes are going to actually be in a given order that is dictated by program order. Okay? And we will basically assume that any interleaving of these reads and writes are going to be acceptable, okay? And all processes have to agree on that interleaving. Okay? So in other words, let's just say, just erase this. Okay? Let's say there are two replicas here, two disks. Okay? The application A and an application B. Application A sends a write, application B sends a read. Okay, this is the same example as last time. Okay. In that example I just gave you, okay, the actual ordering is read, a write, and then the read. Okay, that's the order in which the requests have appeared into the system. Okay. What sequential consistency says is, forget about the actual order because that requires a global clock. We cannot actually figure that out. Okay. So we'll just assume that you pick an order. Right? And so long as all applications agree that that is the order, then we are what is called sequentially consistent. So if applications A and B assume that these two operations happen in this order, which is the opposite, okay, but if they both agree that that's the order in which that actually happened, then we go with that. That means that this read is allowed to read the actually older version of the file than this write has generated, even though this write in reality actually came before. Okay, but if they are If they agree to it, then that's the order that you are okay with. Okay? With only one constraint, which is within a program, you cannot reorder things. Okay? If application A has actually sent R1 before, let's call this, there's a R1, there's a W1 and R2. Okay? You cannot reorder what application, that's the order in which it executed, that you cannot change. Okay? So whatever interleaving you pick, okay, R1 will actually have to appear before W1, but this R2 is from a different process, so you can place it anywhere. You can put it here, you can put it here, and so on. Okay? So what this is doing is allowing you to deviate from what strict consistency does, so long as all applications agree on an interleaving, okay, or an ordering of reads and writes. Okay? You go with that. Okay? So, is that clear? So within an application, you respect program order. Okay, I/O operations of a given application you cannot reorder, but then if you take I/O operations of independent applications, you just interleave them in some way. And whatever interleaving you pick is okay, so long as all applications agree that that's the interleaving that actually occurred. Okay, any questions on this? So there are two examples here, which basically says, let's say that there are 4 processes, okay, and this is time along the horizontal axis. So this process is writing to x the value of A, this process is writing to x value of B, and this process is reading x twice, and this process is reading x twice. Okay? And the assumption is, in reality, if you had strict consistency, then this write has actually happened before this write. But clocks are not synchronized, so you can't figure that out for in practice if these are happening at independent machines. So even if you say that that write actually happened before that write, which means the first read is going to give you a B and the second read is going to give you an A, that is acceptable. So long as all applications or all 4 processes agree that that is the ordering in which these writes are actually entered the system. Okay? So this is something that's not acceptable, because here process 3 thinks that the second write has occurred before the first write, so it sees a B and then an A, and process P4 sees an A and then a B. Okay, so this is where you are disagreeing on the order. One process thinks that this write actually arrived first, and this second process thinks that that write arrived first. That is not going to be allowed by sequential consistency, because they all have to agree on the same order. Okay, so that's an example of not being sequentially consistent. And just to give you a sense of what things are not allowed. Okay. So the high level message to sort of take away is, because you do not have a global clock, when I/O operations arrive more or less at the same time, you can decide which one occurred before which one, rather than having to say there is a global clock and that global clock is going to tell me there is no global clock. So we say you pick, you decide. If these 2 operations all were occurring more or less at the same time, you decide which one occurred before which one, have all the applications say that's the ordering, and just go with it. So you are allowed to, in some sense, actually reorder things, because you don't have a global clock to figure out the real order. Okay, that's really what this consistency mechanism allows you to do. Okay, weaker form of consistency. Any questions on this before I move on? Yes.
So do you have to exchange messages in order to reach a consensus?
Okay, good question. So question is, do you have to exchange messages to reach a consensus? Okay. Now, remember that there's a difference between a consistency model and how you implement that model. This entire discussion for today is going to just be on consistency model. I have not said how do you implement strict consistency. Similarly, I have not said how do you do this. I'm just saying this is a concept. If this makes sense for your application, you can choose it, and how to implement it, different problem. We'll come back to that next time. Okay? But this is just something to give you a sense of how or what assumptions you can make. Okay? Any other questions? You will have to exchange messages for sure. No question about that. But we haven't said this is an implementation of sequential consistency. Okay? Next form of consistency is what is called linearizability. This is actually stricter than sequential consistency. It sits somewhere between strict consistency and sequential consistency. Okay? So it says do everything that you did in sequential consistency, but in addition, if 2 processes are exchanging messages, Okay? Then you have to respect the ordering of events that basically occur as a result of those message exchange, just as we did in Lampport's clocks. Okay, so basically, let's just take this example. In A and B, there's a write from A and a read from B. Okay? If A and B never exchange any messages, then A and B can decide that either this is an ordering, okay, this write has occurred before this, or the opposite ordering, and both of them are acceptable as far as sequential consistency if they both agree. Right? Now if it so happens that A and B actually exchange a message between these two IO operations, then you cannot pick either of these. You have to decide, basically this is timeline. Okay, this is write, and the message went by, and then a read is triggered. Then this message that has been exchanged is actually imposing an ordering, and you have to respect that. Okay? So if this message actually went from A to B, then the only ordering you are going to accept is write followed by read. The opposite will not be allowed, because as we said, when you have message exchange, you can order events across processes, and you have to respect that ordering. That's all it says. Right? So if you just did pure sequential consistency, you ignore the message. Even if there's a message exchange, you are actually allowed to pick an order. Okay? Here, if there's a message exchange, then you say, then you have to choose the order that the message exchange has dictated. If there's no message exchange, you can pick any order. Doesn't matter. Okay? So that's basically what this says, is if you use vector clocks or some such thing, and if the timestamp of IO operation X is less than timestamp of Y, then in whatever ordering you pick, that operation actually has to precede the other operation. You cannot swap it, because that would be inconsistent with respect to message exchanges. Okay, so it says, yes, you do not have global clocks, but if you can order events across processes by actually using logical clocks, at least respect that order. If you have concurrent IO operations or concurrent events, pick whatever ordering you want, and have everyone agree to that order. Okay, so here is an example. Yeah, so there are three processes here. Each process is actually setting a variable x, y, and z to 1, and then it prints the other two variables. Okay, and then the question is, if you want to ensure linearizability, what will you allow and what will you not allow? I will assume that before you start, all of the variables are set to 0. Okay. Now, do you see any message exchanges here?
Well, I guess after you update Y and Z, you have to inform process P1.
I mean, this is like shared memory, not shared
Yes.
message.
So back in the old lectures, when we did message passing and communication, I said there are two forms of communication, structured and unstructured. In structured, we actually send messages back and forth. In unstructured, we basically send implicit messages to shared data structures. Okay? So the claim is actually P1 and P2 are communicating through variable. P1 has actually written a value to X, and P2 is reading that value and printing it out. That's an implicit form of communication, even though there's no explicit message exchange. Okay? Because this variable X is shared between P1 and P2, you write to that shared buffer and you read from it, that's like sending a message. Okay? So even though there is no explicit sockets or RPCs actually happening here, there is implicit communication going on between these processes through shared memory. Okay? So what that means is basically you will have to, if you are doing linearizability, you will have to see what has happened before what, and then only then will you actually allow a certain ordering. Okay, is that clear? So you could have actually had a real message sent here that would have made it explicit, but the claim here is there is some implicit message passing going on, and if you want linearizability for these three processes, how to pick an interleaving, then you have to respect that message passing. So here are 4 valid sequences. All of this we will accept as valid ones. Okay? So this is one interleaving. So we are taking the 6 instructions, and we are going to say find an ordering, okay, or agree on an ordering of how the 6 instructions executed with respect to real time, even though they may be executing on independent. Here are 4 different orderings. Okay. And we'll claim that all 4 are valid. In this one, you basically have the first instruction of process 1 and the second instruction of process 2 and so on. Okay, so this is what it prints. Okay, so this is the output of each of these. Now the only thing that we will not allow is after, let's say, a variable like x is set to 1, any print of x that occurs after it cannot print 0. Okay, because you have basically written to shared buffer, and if you are reading it afterwards, you better get what was written, because that's a message that has been passed. So you will see in that all of these cases, after a variable has been updated, you will never print a value for it that is 0. Okay? But if before it has been updated, like here z has been updated to 1, but these 2 prints of z can print zeros, that's allowed. Okay? So any schedule which will, once you are updated, you write an old version, that we will disallow because there is message passing going on. Okay? In sequential consistency, you could have even allowed that. You would have said x is set to 1, but I am going to assume that the message never went, and then I am going to let a print of x actually produce 0. So long as all the processes agree, that's the ordering of events, you are still allowed that. So that's much weaker than this. Is that clear? I mean, it's a somewhat abstract concept because there's no real message passing going on, but there's implicit message passing. Okay. So that is linearizability. Okay. Next form of consistency is what is called causal consistency. So what this says is causally related writes must be seen by all processes in the same order, but concurrent writes may be seen in different order by different processes. So this is actually weaker than linearizability. It basically says that if you have messages that are going back and forth, okay, then you have to respect the ordering that these messages dictate. Okay. And if there are events that are not ordered by messages, then you can pick whatever order, and moreover different processes can now pick different order of events. Okay. Until now, all forms of consistency, we have said all processes must agree to a single order. They must all say this is the order in which all of these events have occurred. Okay. We are going to now relax that and says if 2 IO operations are not related, there is no message passing, then 2 different processes can assume they arrived in 2 different orders. And that is allowed in this case. So it's even weaker than the previous one, where you would have to pick an arbitrary ordering and stick to that. Here you say concurrent writes, which are writes that are not related by message, cannot be ordered by message, may be seen in different orders on different machines. Okay, here is an example of what this means. Okay. So here we have one data item x, you write x, you write A to it, you write x, you write B. Okay, and this is what P3 and P4 are seeing. Okay. Now notice that there is no message passing between P1 and P2 here. Okay, you are simply just writing to a variable. Okay, there is no read between those two. Okay. So in this case, P3 and P4 can see the writes in different order. P3 will say this write has occurred before P4 will say this write has occurred before that write. So it says A and B, and P3 is the opposite. Okay. And that's allowed. Okay, because the different processes are seeing the writes arriving in different order in the system. You are not even trying to order them globally. Okay. And this is because these 2 writes are concurrent. Let's take this scenario, which is the same example as that, except that there is a read between these 2 writes. Okay. And the claim is because you are reading the value of a variable and that read is returning the value that this write has put in, there is a message that has gone, as implicit message passing. This is a shared buffer. You wrote value A to that buffer, you read a value, and A came back from it, came out of it. So now there is a message because you wrote A and A came out. And then this write has occurred. So now these 2 writes are no longer concurrent, they are causally dependent. Okay, you can only say that this write has occurred before this write. Okay, so anytime you P3 or P4 read it, you will basically have to first see A and then see B. So in this case, you basically P4 sees A and then sees B. P3 is actually the same as that, but this is not going to be permitted now. Because you can't arbitrarily decide if they are causally related, you have to respect that ordering. Okay, so this will not be permitted as if you implement causal consistency. Okay, in fact, not that it won't be permitted, your system shouldn't actually have this happen. Otherwise, you are not providing causal consistent guarantees. Okay, is that clear? Okay, so I would urge you to all go back and think about this. There are some subtleties. We are slowly weakening one property at a time. You have to understand what is it that we are weakening and what can you and can you not allow in the system. Okay? This is the first time you have said processes don't even need to agree. So what that means is, here is a process P3 that is seeing one update after another and vice versa. Right? So this kind of stuff can happen, let's say, I mean this looks very abstract, but just to make it a little more concrete, let's say you have things like Twitter, right, where people are posting, or maybe you even have like things like Facebook where people post on your walls and so on. So if people send in tweets, different people who have subscribed to those same set of tweets can see them in different orders, and that's allowed. And that's just an example of what this means in real life. Okay? So now there are many other models that are even weaker. There's one called FIFO consistency, which is quite weak. Basically this says writes from a process may be seen in the same order, but writes from different processes can be seen in different order. So this says, let's forget about all this complicated stuff. Let's just say what each process is doing and only look at that ordering and then respect that ordering. So you can pick different processes, are allowed to pick different interleaving, so long as you basically see the same ordering across, for a given person. So again, going back to the Twitter example, if your friend tweets twice, let's say tweet 1 and tweet 2, and then another friend also does 2 tweets, you can see them in whatever order you want, so long as you see them in order in which they posted. Okay, you can pick any interleaving you want, regardless of what the actual time, even if they were dependent. Okay? That's FIFO consistent. It's pretty weak in what it's trying to do. All it is saying is within what one person is doing, just show me that order. Across people you can, or across processes you can basically pick different order. Okay? Now we'll see that even for FIFO consistency may be too strong in some cases because it requires writes from a process to be seen in order. Okay? We'll come back to eventual consistency. We'll weaken even this form of consistency shortly. Now, all of the models we have looked at so far are trying to order individual I/O operations, reads and writes, and try to reason about what order they have occurred and what processes are seen. Okay. There is another way to do this, which is basically you use granularity of critical sections rather than individual reads and writes. So you can use either a transaction or a critical section, and then only look at what happened before the transaction and critical section and what happened after. Anything that happened in between, you don't worry about the ordering. So you can let whatever happened happen. Okay, so what that means essentially is if you had, let's say, private workspaces as an example, where if before you write to a shared region, you make a private copy and you read and write to it, and when the transaction is about to finish, you will propagate those changes back. So you don't worry about what happened during the transaction, you only worry about what happened at the beginning and what happened at the end. This allows you more flexibility because while the transaction is executing, you don't actually have to worry about ordering rights. Okay, only at the begin and the end is where you make things consistent. Okay. The best way to sort of explain this is what is called entry consistency and release consistency. Okay. So what this says is assumes that any shared data is made consistent at the entry or the exit parts of critical sections. Okay, so let's say you say begin transaction. Okay. At that point you basically see, let's say the transaction is accessing 2 records, okay, record A and record B. You say at the moment I want any updates that have occurred to A and B be made consistent, so I have the most recent copy. Okay, so the database will do whatever it wants to do, make them consistent, and you take those copies and you start executing. Okay. And then when you are done, you will basically commit, but you will not make it consistent until the next transaction. So you do this at entry points of transactions. In release consistency, you will do this at exit points of transaction. You will basically propagate all the updates at exit points. Once you are committing the transaction, you will send messages and make them all consistent. Now, these forms of consistency are only used typically in databases, okay, but they are worth thinking about because you have to do much less work than you have to do in all of these other forms. Because there, you have to reason about individual I/O operations. And if there are lots of I/Os, that makes things very complicated. So if you only have to worry about transactions, which are higher level constructs, that makes it easier to implement your consistency mechanism. Okay, so here is a summary of what we have actually been talking about. Okay, so we started with strict. Okay, so that says absolute ordering. It requires global clock. You have to use that global clock to timestamp every operation, and whatever the timestamp says, that's the order in which all these operations have occurred. Okay. We then looked at sequential consistency, which says all processes respect program order, and you have to agree on some ordering. Doesn't matter what the real ordering is, just agree to one. So long as you respect program order, that's good enough. Linearizability essentially says not only should you have program order, but if there are messages going back and forth, also respect any ordering that results from those messages. Okay. Causal consistency essentially says causally related writes have to be seen in the same order. Okay. But if you have concurrent writes, you no longer have to agree on the order. You can pick different orders. Okay. These three, I assume that everybody actually agrees to one and only one order. Causal consistency, only causally related I/O operations have to be ordered. The others you can disagree on and process them in different order. Okay, and in FIFO you don't even have that. You don't even have to worry about causally related writes. You only look at writes within a process and order them in different interleavings are allowed. Okay. This is per write based consistency, and these ones are basically what are consistency at a granularity of critical sections or transactions. Okay, and entry consistency, you basically all shared data pertaining to critical region is made consistent at the entry in the critical section, and here you do all the work. The consistency mechanism or the algorithm is run at the exit point of a critical section. Okay, so this is implemented at the entry point, here you implement it at the exit points. Okay, you don't have to do both, you can only do one or the other. Okay, that's the point in time where you actually implement consistency. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a second before I talk about eventual consistency. So that's quite a bit of concepts that I've covered here. Okay, so and sometimes the nuances between some of this is not completely apparent until you actually work through some examples and understand it. So I would urge you to go and do exactly that. We will continue some discussion of this next time as well. So if you have questions, I'm going to take a minute at the beginning to see if there is any concept to clarify. Okay, but you are also welcome to ask questions now. Okay, so the next form of consistency we'll talk about is what is called eventual consistency. Okay, this is probably the loosest form of consistency. Only slightly better than saying let's not worry about consistency at all, let things get inconsistent. What eventual consistency says is that essentially we will not worry about what when there are updates occurring to the system. Let's not worry about trying to figure out an ordering. That's too hard. Too many messages have to be exchanged. Okay? But let's assume that any updates that come in do get propagated to other replicas, okay, over time. And if no updates come, eventually all the replicas will see all the updates and converge to the consistent state. Okay? So that's what eventual consistency is. Eventually things will be consistent. But while there are updates, there are no guarantees on what actually happens. Now, as it turns out, this is very weak consistency because it doesn't say that if you go and read something, you have to actually see a most recent update. Because it's eventually consistent. You are allowed to return old values. After some time, eventually you should ensure that the new value does arrive at that replica, but until then, old values are okay. Now, this form of consistency, it seems very loose. It is actually used widely in practice. There are many systems that use it. So DNS is a good example. We talked about DNS when we did naming. DNS uses a form of eventual consistency. You can go, let's say you register a domain for yourself. Okay, you pick your favorite name.com. Okay, and you basically register that in the DNS. DNS is actually going to use weak consistency. In fact, when you register it, you will get a message saying it may take 24 to 48 hours before this domain is actually visible to anyone. Okay? The reason is all DNS servers are using eventual consistency. What they do is periodically they go and contact some other DNS servers and say, have you seen any new records appear? If so, send them to me. Yeah, and if I have some new records, I'm going to send them to you. So you periodically exchange updates. Okay? As a result, it may take a while before the changes propagate to all the replicas. Okay, this is eventual consistency because there is no guarantee saying that as soon as you register a domain, everyone can see it. It may take up to 2 days. The reason it takes 2 days is some DNS servers periodically update once a day. So on an average, it may take up to 48 hours before a change is actually propagated. Right? Many other systems use this as well. So in our department, if you actually register your laptop to this wireless network called ChaosNet, that also uses eventual consistency. After you register, you will get a message. It may take up to 2 minutes before you can actually connect. This is because once you register your laptop with the system, it may take up to 2 minutes for that registration to be sent to all the wireless access points because they talk to one another maybe once a minute. Okay, and then only once the next time they come to the registration server saying, do you have any new machine that has registered, will your registration entry be given to that access point, only then will that access point let you on the net. Okay. So all very loose forms of consistency. There are no real guarantees. It may actually take more than 2 minutes, but that's a good bet that after 2 minutes things will be okay. So this is called eventual consistency. It's, as I said, widely used. Because most systems, although we had this discussion of strict and all of these forms of consistency, most systems don't even do that. It's too hard. They're too expensive. So they say, let's make things eventually consistent. For these kinds of applications, they make sense. For databases, this would be horrendous. And you can't say a paycheck has been deposited. It may take 1 week before you know that it has. So that kind of stuff doesn't work for applications like databases. But for many other kinds of applications, it makes good sense to implement it because there's very little overhead. As soon as the update comes in, you don't have to send it to all the replicas. Replicas will contact you at their leisure at some point in time. At that point, you will say, yes, the update did arrive, here it is. And then that update will propagate to these other replicas. So that's basically what eventual consistency. Same thing happens when you update Unix passwords, because there are password databases that are replicated. So you may actually go update it. If you try to log into another machine with that password or SSH to another machine, sometimes you have to use your old password because that machine is talking to an older version of the password, older replica of the password database. It hasn't even seen your changes. Every 30 minutes it may go and start exchanging records saying, have there been any updates to passwords and so on. Okay, so you actually see sometimes problems crop up because of this loose form of consistency, but by and large it works okay for many applications. Okay, so I already said what I wanted to say. Okay, so saying that the only requirement is an update should eventually propagate to all the replicas. It's cheap to implement and things work fine so long as you access the same replica. This is exactly the password example. You update the password at one machine and you try to log on to a different machine, then you may see a problem. So that machine may be bound to a different replica that hasn't seen your update. Yeah, so you will see some inconsistencies once in a while. Okay, any questions on this? So I'm going to talk a little bit about a form of eventual consistency called epidemic protocols. And then I'm going to end the lecture. We'll come back and look at epidemic protocols next time in a lot more detail. Okay. So now we are going from concept or model to implementation. Okay. Everything we have talked about has only been concepts. Okay. What is strict consistency? What their definition in some sense? What is the definition of eventual consistency? We haven't actually said how do you do it. Okay. And for as an example, I'm only going to show you how to do it for eventual consistency because there are some interesting things you can do. Okay. So this example implementation is taken, is for eventual consistency, is taken from a system called Bayou. Okay? It was developed about 25 years ago now, almost 25 years ago, in the late 80s, early 90s at Xerox PARC, which was a large research lab then. No, actually doesn't even exist as a research lab of Xerox anymore. Okay, but what the system was basically doing is it was trying to implement replication, a weak form of replication, and the use case was basically mobile computing. Okay, so think about 25 years ago. People had laptops, so what they would assume is you basically, whenever you have laptops, you may actually occasionally get disconnected from the network. Your laptop is not always connected. Let's say you are here right now, you are connected to Wi-Fi, you leave this building, there is no Wi-Fi network, you get disconnected. Okay. Now what happens to all the data you are carrying with you? Maybe while you are disconnected, new mail arrives. Okay. But you cannot, the mail cannot be delivered to you because you are not connected to the network. Or you basically make some local changes to your source code here, but you cannot copy that file over to the server because you are disconnected. Okay. So the only thing that makes sense when nodes can disconnect it is eventual consistency, because there is no network connection for you to even tell the client or the machine that some changes have occurred. You can only tell them later. Okay, so when you reconnect, things will actually be sent to you. So if new mail has arrived, the next time you connect to the network and you start your mail application, new mail gets delivered eventually, right? So that's, or your files that you have modified can be copied over. So that's the example they came up with, which is weak form of consistency. But the nice concept that they used to implement eventual consistency is what was basically, they used this notion of theory of epidemics, or how infectious diseases spread. Okay, so assume that you have a cold, okay, and you do not take the proper precautions, and you go and shake someone's hands, okay, and you pass on that germ to that person. That person has gotten infected. Okay, so this is basically the way you spread infectious disease is pairwise. You are infected, you go and you come into contact with someone else, and inadvertently, hopefully not advertently, you pass on the germs to that other person. Right? This is how diseases spread, and the same thing is true here. Okay, so we'll assume that whenever a machine receives an update, okay, it has basically gotten infected. And it wants to send infected, meaning it has a new update that it wants to spread as quickly as possible to all replicas. So what it will do is it will use pairwise exchange. Okay, every once in a while it will contact another replica and try to infect it or spread the infection, which means it will try to spread that data to another machine. Okay. And because soon many machines are going to get infected rather, and they will also try to spread the infection, the data will quickly spread to all the replicas. Just as once one person becomes sick, everybody around them, they don't take care, becomes sick, because you infect someone, now there are 2 people infected, they will go and infect more people, and then you will basically get exponential increase in the number of people that are getting infected. And soon it becomes an epidemic. And that's basically why it's called epidemic protocol. Okay? So basically they use this concept of how diseases spread through pairwise contact, and implemented that as a form of eventual consistency. Yeah, so the idea was very simple. There is always a store, there are many stores or disks, and you can make an update on any disk. And what will happen is these machines will periodically contact one another, and any updates they have received since the previous contact, they will push and infect that other machine. Okay, now that there are 2 copies of your data item, and then each store is going to continue to do that, and the hope is soon all replicas in the system will get the data item that was injected into the system. Okay, so we will come back to how do you do this next time. There are many variants of epidemic protocols. Okay, there's one called gossip protocol. I don't know if you've heard of gossip versions of protocol. That's basically like infection, spreading infections, but they are used in different analogies, how rumors spread through gossiping. Right? One person knows, he tells his or her friend, now 2 people know, they go and tell the rumor to someone else, and soon everybody knows what the rumor is through gossip. Right? Same idea, pairwise exchange, and then there's quick spreading of rumors or quick spreading of infection. the variants of these protocols that we look at, but we will stop here for today and then we'll continue this discussion next time.